Welcome to Sound Bites, hosted by registered dietitian nutritionist Melissa Joy Dobbins.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sound Bites podcast. Today's episode is all about snacking, the history, the trends, and the impact on mealtime. It's chock full of consumer insights and lots of food for thought. Now, it's not a sponsored episode, but I do want to give a really big shout out to Bush's Beans. They sponsored the snacking session at the conference that I attended in Toronto. And if you want some great information on adding versatile, tasty beans to your meals and snacks, then check out the website for information, recipes, and inspiration at bushbeans.com. Now, I also want to announce today's winners of the DNA Body Blueprint Test giveaway. So we have two winners, Lauren Larson and Lauren Harris Pincus. So apparently you have to have the name Lauren to win the drawing. But these two lucky winners will each receive the $99 value DNA test kit from Nutrisystem. So a huge thank you to Nutrisystem and to Courtney McCormick, my awesome guest from last episode. And congratulations to the two Laurens who will be twinning with their DNA tests. On a personal note, I just got back from a trip to Colorado. I attended a meeting for the Beef Expert Bureau and learned some interesting information that I'll be sharing with you as time goes on through the podcast about ranching and sustainability. And I even got to cut my own filet mignon steak from the tenderloin and cook it, which seemed very scary to me at the time, but it was actually pretty easy and so delicious. So that was a great meeting. And afterwards, I went skiing with my husband and my son. It was my son's first time skiing, and I think officially was my fifth time skiing. And I did a few green runs, and I did a blue run, and as you know, I injured my foot last late summer, fall, and was in a boot for a while, so I was a little anxious about the skiing, but I'm happy to say that I didn't fall down, I did not injure myself, and I was also able to videotape my son skiing while I was skiing, which I can't believe I did that, but it was important for me to try to get that on tape, so I did. I'm ramping up for my spring travel and media trainings. I will be in Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, and Vermont. And I'm also doing a messaging workshop at Today's Dietitian. So let me know if you're going to be there. That's at the end of May in Scottsdale, Arizona. And as you know, all the details are on my website at soundbitesrd.com. So be sure to stay tuned to the end of the show today to hear some important information from my partner, the American Association of Diabetes Educators. Enjoy today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to the Sound Bites podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Joy Dobbins, a registered dietitian nutritionist. And on the show, I delve into the science, the psychology, and the strategies behind good food and nutrition. And one of my favorite things to talk about is consumer insights. So I'm really excited about our topic today being snacking and mealtime. And my guest is Dr. Shelley Balanko. She is the Senior Vice President with the Hartman Group, which is a food culture consultancy. Shelley routinely shares consumer insights and food and beverage trends to audiences in the food and beverage industry. And I had the wonderful opportunity of seeing her present recently at a conference in Toronto. Welcome to the show, Dr. Balanko.
Thanks, Melissa. It's great to be here.
I loved the information and the insight that you shared at the presentation that I saw you do recently in Toronto. Now, you work with the Hartman Group. Tell us what the Hartman Group is and who they are, what their mission is, and a little bit more about your role there.
So the Hartman Group is a food and beverage culture consultancy, and our mission is to help our clients grow their businesses. And so what we do is through custom and syndicated research, both quantitative and qualitative, we provide insight into what consumers want to eat, how they eat, where and how they shop, and so forth. We also spend a lot of time studying food culture trends, looking both quantitatively and qualitatively at emerging signals of trends. Again, all in the interest of helping our clients grow their businesses. And our unique point of view is that all of our food decisions are culturally bound. And so we look at consumer behavior from a social science perspective, drawing on anthropology and sociology, and sharing why culture is the way it is, how it's shifting and evolving over time to really help our clients understand what the future opportunities are in the food and beverage industry.
Interesting. Okay, great. So your role there, I mean, you have a PhD, you're a psychologist, you're a social psychologist?
Well, I have a PhD in social psychology. I can't legally call myself a psychologist because I'm not registered in the state of Washington. However, yes, that is my background. And currently, my role is to share the Hartman Group's insights and trends with clients and prospective clients, really to help them get a leg up on understanding consumers today. And another piece of my role is to understand what's going on in the industry, deeply understanding the challenges that a lot of food and beverage manufacturers, retailers, and food service companies are facing so that we can better design our studies to help them overcome those challenges and do well and capitalize on opportunities.
Excellent. So can you tell us a little bit about how you wound up at the Hartman Group and what your background was prior to joining them?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I ended up here a little bit by accident. It was more of a methodological alignment. So I've been with the company for 13 and a half years, and I started as an ethnographic analyst because I have both quantitative and qualitative research skills from my academic life. And I also had a strong personal interest in health and wellness. And at the time that I joined the Hartman Group, their core area of expertise was health and wellness, natural and organic, as well as sustainability. We still maintain those three topical areas of expertise today, but at the time we were doing research for a variety of other industries that my background was well suited to. And so that's how I got started. It was my research skills that really got me on this path. And then I fell in love with the food industry because, hey, who doesn't like to eat? And I guess the rest is history.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Very interesting. Now, the presentation I saw you do in Toronto was all about snacking, and you and I had a pre-call to kind of discuss what we might want. Of course, I had to have you on the podcast. As my regular listeners know, like I said, I'm just really into consumer insights, partly because I feel like what we see in the media and on social media is so kind of far out compared to what reality is. And I feel like being a registered dietitian and having worked with clients and real people one-on-one and in groups, I just always felt like there's this huge divide. And whenever I hear consumer insights, I just, and I know that part of that could be that that's what people are saying versus what they're doing. But then you have the purchasing behavior and that sort of data. I just, trying to put all those little pieces together, I just find very interesting. And in your snacking presentation, you talked a lot about dinner time. And I have my Do More with Dinner initiative where a few years ago, I decided that for me personally, I wanted to do more, which really means do less, with dinner time and get more out of that experience with my family, whether it was cooking a little bit more or having more robust family conversations and just really being more present during that space and time. So the information that you shared about dinner time, meal time, snacking, really caught my interest in that vein. But as I was saying, we had a pre-call to kind of discuss what different topics we could share on the podcast, where we had a lot of different options that veered way off of the presentation that you did. But we kind of came back to this. The long question that I have here that I'm trying to spit out is, when it comes to all of the variety and the interesting consumer insights that you see, why does snacking stick out to you or stand out to you? What do you find most interesting about what you've learned? And then we're going to share some specifics.
Sure. Snacking is a really interesting topic because I think there's some ambivalence around it among consumers because on the one hand, it's really become the modern eating pattern. Everyone's doing it. 91% of consumers snack multiple times throughout the day. So it really is something that's, taken our culture by storm. However, there is some ambivalence around it. As consumers can see the upside to snacking, there's a lot of opportunities to add nutrition to your diet, but there's also a lot of opportunities to do, overeating or snacking on things that are against one's, food philosophy or nutritional goals. And so there's a little bit of ambivalence there. And another place where snacking features prominently in consumer conversations is how it can threaten the meals that we still try to prioritize in our culture, especially that evening meal, our dinner hour. And so snacking is a double-edged sword, really.
Right. It could be helpful. It could be hurtful. And you've got some great data to share with us. But one of the things that caught my attention most in looking at the information that you shared was that 50% of all eating occasions are snacks. So you can talk to me about, has that increased over the years? I'm assuming it has, because it just seems like a really large number. And because of that, we got to pay attention to what's going on with our snacking.
Yes, absolutely. We are snacking more. I mean, unfortunately, our database only goes back to 2012. We weren't tracking this the 1970s, but culturally, we know it was not acceptable to snack during a business meeting or in the middle of class. And we now know that behavior happens all the time, and it's perfectly acceptable. And so, yes, we have become a culture of snackers, and we are now eating on the go. And it's pretty much commonplace to have food or beverage with you at all times, whether you're on public transit, in your own vehicle, as I said earlier, at a meeting or at your own desk. And so we really have become a culture that has embraced this continuous eating, if you will. And as I said before, there are upsides and downsides to that. But the net effect is we are doing more snacking. And because of that, snacking has taken a greater importance in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when you couldn't have food and beverages here, there, everywhere. I mean, it really has changed dramatically in my lifetime. Well, let's start by talking about dinner time, meal time. Because one of the reasons I came up with my Do More with Dinner was because of the pressure and the guilt and the frustration and all the different feelings I was having about just trying to get dinner on the table for my family, provide them nutritious foods, not spend all day doing it. Everything from making my trips to the grocery store less often and more efficient to adapting a recipe and just trying to keep it simple, but trying to get, more ROI. And I know I'm not alone. And that's why I had decided to share my Do More with Dinner initiative with the world, because I realized that, if I'm feeling this way, I think this can resonate with other people. So I found it really interesting what you shared about dinner time. So I'd like to discuss that now. We aspire to this ideal, but you shed some light on that ideal that we're comparing our lives to. So I'd like you to talk about that.
Sure. Well, you aren't alone. It is a cultural phenomenon. And the reason why we still have so much tied up in that evening meal is because there's some strong cultural roots to that. Today's consumer has an ideal in their mind that harks back to the 1950s. They have this notion that, we should all be having an evening meal together with our families. And it's around a dinner table, not hunched over a sink or a counter or in front of the television. And, that meal was lovingly prepared from scratch ingredients by mom in most circumstances, and really shared communally with that kind of intentional, lovely conversation, whereby we are sharing our values and our ideals with each other. And that ideal is in some ways attached to an imagined past. When we talk to consumers today about, when do you think people ate like that? They'll often say, the 1950s. Well, in the 1950s, there were actually a lot of processed prepared foods that boomers were eating as they were growing up.
Like TV dinners, those boiled TV dinners, yeah.
Exactly. There were a lot of, helpful solutions to help mom get dinner on the table, even in the 1950s. And most consumers today, their lived past is closer to like the 1980s, when we were eating very similarly to how we are today, with both parents or adults in the household working and having very little time to prepare meals or to do a lot of shopping. And so a lot of convenience foods were used in the 80s, and a lot of convenience foods are used today because, again, both adults are working and sharing the labor around shopping and meal preparement. And the difference, I guess, between consumers' real lived past and contemporary life is that the prepared foods that they're relying on today, they're seeking higher quality, less processing, more freshness, and trying to get more real foods into their diets.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back in history a little bit more where, we've got this somewhat imagined past, but there was a point in history where dinner sort of became more special. And I'd like you to talk about that and also how we eat more like Native Americans and early Americans, because this is fascinating to me.
Yeah, there's a great book called Three Squares by Abigail Carroll, and she provides a wonderful history, and I can recap that now. So the 1950s way of eating is actually grounded in our Victorian era eating ideals. So when the settlers came to the United States and were creating this new world, the colonists were kind of shocked by what they found. They found Native Americans who were eating really the way we do today, on the go, stopping to eat when they were hungry. And they weren't really cooking their food, but rather they were eating dried fruits and berries and nuts and staples that they could carry with them. And so that seemed really quite strange to the colonists who were eating cooked meals. And when they were settling America, they were eating things like pottage, cooking a one-pot dinner over an open fire in a big kettle. And it was a mixture of grains and vegetables and meat. And so that, to me, sounds very similar to what we're doing today with one-pot meals and everything cooked in a crock pot or instant pot. And so that's going way back. So there's some similarities there. But then this emotional attachment or this guilt that we feel with, the primacy of dinner and how important it is, that has a lot to do with transitioning from being an agrarian economy to an industrial one. Because, once the settlers had, formed farms, families were really working together on these farms. And the most important meal of the day at that time was the midday meal. And that's when everybody came back from the fields, had a large meal to sustain themselves, and they shared what was going on in their lives. And it was really the opportunity for adults to socialize the young with manners, etiquette, and values. And then what happened with the Industrial Revolution is we no longer worked together on those farms. People left the farm and went into factories to work. And because we weren't sharing our lives in that midday meal, we needed a time to do that, to commune. And so the evening meal, dinner, became that very special occasion. And that's why even to this day, we feel the necessity to eat together at dinner, because that's really the time when we can bond as a family and really socialize our children with the values and the manners and the etiquette that we want them to have.
Interesting. Do you have any statistics on how often families are eating dinner together? Maybe I'll back up a little bit too, because there's all these sort of words that need to be defined. We're going to define or talk about the definitions of snacks and meals and so on. But a family, I know fewer households have children under the age of 18, I believe. Those sort of demographics are changing. So is there anything that stands out that you could share with us about the frequency of family meals or what a family meal looks like?
Yeah, family meals today are in flux. And, consumers are distinguishing meals from snacks still, although the lines between the two are getting really quite blurry. We see more alone eating than we had seen before. So that family meal is kind of shifting. While consumers today are really prioritizing the family meal, they're trying to make an effort to eat together at dinner. We also see a lot of shifting toward weekend breakfasts as an opportunity for families to actually get together, because that late afternoon, early evening schedules are just too busy.
Right.
It's really preventing families from eating together. Although I do have some statistics that talk about the proportion of families that are participating in dinner. I mean, we have seen a bit of a decline, certainly among millennials. 83% of millennials were participating in dinner in 2012, and that went down to 77% in 2017. And among Gen Xers, it went from 85% to 80%. But the good news is that households with kids are tending to buck that trend. We have 45% of households without children participating in the 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but 58% of households with kids participating in those 3 meals. So we do have some shifts going on, but we know that, well, we at the Hartman Group feel optimistic that dinner will not completely disappear, and that certainly families will be the ones trying to maintain its prominence in our food culture.
Right. Well, and, looking back at history and kind of looking where we are today and looking forward, your comment about weekend breakfast kind of becoming the new weeknight family dinner, I'm encouraged by the evolution, if you will, that, okay, what we've been trying to do maybe isn't working. And so let's find a new, model, and, maybe focusing more on the weekend family meals. And also, we're going to talk more about snacks and snacking and the blurred line between snacking and meals. And, of course, as a dietitian, I've always felt like, well, let's focus on the opportunities with snacking, and how it can be used as a way to boost nutrition. And, let's make the most of our snacks and make sure they're nutrient rich and so on. And so for me, I don't care so much if something's a snack or a meal. I'm looking at how much nutrition we're getting from it. And I know we're going to talk about that. And it's interesting too, because I feel like, well, everybody has their own definition of healthy. So probably everybody has their own definition of snacks. So I wanted to ask you about that. But first, snacking, I think you mentioned this earlier, but snacking was kind of taboo. And I'd love to hear the history and have you explain how snacking even came about.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So snacking has been taboo, and it's always threatened the American meal. So let's just be clear about that. This is not a new phenomenon. But back in the Industrial Revolution, snacks were definitely considered taboo because they were associated with the street. Because a lot of snacks like fruit or nuts or popcorn were sold by street vendors. And the street vendors also lived on the street oftentimes. And so they were not deemed fit for at-home consumption because of the unclean association with the foods, as well as the fact that they were associated with bawdy street entertainment like circuses and fairs and what have you. So at that time, in the Victorian era, snacks were considered unclean, unfit for at-home consumption. And the other reason why they were strongly discouraged is because they threatened that very important evening meal. And during the Industrial Revolution, the dinner time meal was a way for this emerging middle class to show its social mobility. And anything that was going to hamper your performance at that evening meal was really strongly discouraged. And the Victorians felt that anybody who snacked was just morally weak. And so if you snacked, you were morally weak. You also wouldn't perform as well at dinner. And so they were definitely taboo. And the only people who were allowed a snack at that time were children. And even that, it wasn't celebrated. In fact, at the time, a permissible after-school snack was a piece of dry bread. So,
yum.
Yes, times have changed.
Wow. Okay, cool. So I know that the definition of snack, definition of meal is sort of evolving, but essentially, if you had to describe the difference between the two where we are today, how would you differentiate the difference between a meal and a snack? Or how are people doing that?
That's a great question. So there's a fair amount of consensus among consumers today about, what a meal is. Snacks, on the other hand, it's a little fuzzier, but that's because we don't have as much cultural history around snacks, really defining what they are. But essentially, meals have a normative day part association. There's a normal time when you are supposed to be having breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Consumers also believe that meals are more substantial than snacks, both in terms of the quantity of food consumed as well as the calorie load. There's also the expectation that a meal is supposed to have balance among proteins and vegetables and carbs. And a really important piece of meals is we still believe that they should be shared. They should be eaten communally. Whereas a snack, it's totally okay. It's totally permissible to eat that alone. Even though we are doing a lot of meal consumption alone, we don't see it as the ideal. And so snacks, on the other hand, are those things that we're eating between meals. So it really punctuates or bridges these larger eatings. A key component of something being a snack is the fact that it takes very little or no preparation. And snacks are also very individualized and personalized, whereas a meal is something where you're more likely to be making concessions because, you're eating communally. And so it's not entirely driven by your own needs and wants and desires. So those are some of the key differences between meals and snacks.
Mm-hmm. Great. So let's talk more about snacks and the different, why do we snack? What are we trying to accomplish? There seems to be three different sort of aspirations that sort of come together and change throughout the day, throughout the week. So let's talk about, why we're snacking, what we're trying to accomplish, and how that can vary.
Sure. So a couple of years ago, we studied snacking intensively to create a modern snacking framework, which is really trying to unearth the whys behind our snacking behavior today. And what we found is that there's essentially three main, demand spaces. And these include nourishment, optimization, and pleasure. And so when we're snacking, these drivers can co-occur. So it's not like, when you have a snack, you're only snacking for nourishment. Sometimes you might be snacking for both nourishment and pleasure. So that's important to understand in the model. And some of the underlying needs within nourishment are things like making sure you're no longer hungry, ensuring that you stay hydrated, maintaining energy levels throughout the day, or perhaps managing a condition like diabetes. And then when it comes to the pleasure area within snacking, really when we're snacking for pleasure, we're driven by the need for a reward or to indulge in some comfort food or indulge in a craving. And it's also an opportunity to get variety. Snacks are a great way to have something different, shake it up, alleviate boredom, and discover something new. And then lastly, we have optimization. And the optimization area of snacking is kind of the newest need that we're seeing among consumers. And really younger consumers like millennials, they're the ones who tend to snack for these reasons. And so optimization reasons include wanting a little quick energy boost or perhaps needing a snack to recover or rejuvenate after a workout or a really intense meeting. It's about eating and drinking to sustain one's mental focus. And it's also a way to manage emotions that are kind of negative, like stress management. So those are some of the needs underlying optimization.
And talk to me a little bit about how those three areas, like you said, you could have the trifecta. You could be having a snack that hits on all three. Sometimes it's just, strictly pleasure or just strictly optimization, but, you're probably looking at two and sometimes three. How do those choices change based on maybe age, gender, time of day of the week, and so on?
That's a great question. So generally speaking, we tend to have our focus on nourishment earlier in the day and earlier in the week. So nourishment and optimization go somewhat hand in hand. Nourishment is like early morning and optimization is more like midday, later afternoon. And pleasure, well, as the day wears on, our resolve goes away and, pleasure kicks in. And so in that late afternoon, evening, and certainly late night, we're typically snacking more with pleasure in mind. And then with regard to the way that the week goes, again, we have more resolve around eating for nourishment and optimization with our health and wellness objectives in mind, kind of Monday through Thursday. And then when Friday rolls around and throughout the weekend, we're really oriented more around pleasure.
That makes so much sense. It really resonates with me. So there's opportunities out there for dietitians to kind of look at that sort of intuitive internal trend from the beginning of the day to later and then beginning of the week into the weekend. So let's talk a little bit more about how our snacking is tied to our needs for appetite and hunger control, that sustained energy, maybe mental focus. What are you seeing from consumers as far as, and I'm hoping to hear some good news from you on this, is like, how many consumers are saying, yeah, I'm really snacking to try to fill those nutrient gaps or trying to boost fiber. So I look to snacks to try to, help me do that. Can you talk to me about some of those different data points that you might be seeing with your research?
Sure. So in terms of, the three main areas of snacking, we see that 56% of all snacking occasions reflect a need for nourishment. So that's good. That's the biggest one. Mm-hmm. That's followed by 49% of all snacking occasions reflecting the need for pleasure. And then lastly, as I said, optimization is kind of the newer kid on the block with regard to the needs. 34% of all snacking occasions reflect that need for optimization, which is like quenching thirst, waking them up, supporting athletic performance, and stuff like that. So we do have health and wellness and nourishment pretty much top of mind across at least half, slightly better than half of our snacking occasions. So that's good news. And younger consumers, interestingly enough, they're more adept around snacking for sustaining energy as well as managing their appetite. So we see younger consumers taking a much more kind of proactive way with regard to snacking.
Just to clarify with optimization, I'm just thinking as you're talking, because a lot of the keywords and ideas that you've brought up with regard to optimization, I feel like are technically nourishment. So would you say they're sort of like the next level of nourishment, like sort of fine tuning, like kind of taking, nourishment kind of covers the basics, but optimization is sort of at a more advanced level?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, so nourishment is really about your foundation, and then optimization is kicking it up to the next level. Mm-hmm. So we see optimization coming more to play when consumers are trying to refuel after they know that they've really kind of burned through some energy and they need to get back up to where their comfortable baseline is. Also, optimization tends to focus more on when consumers are looking at a food or beverage that's going to support their mental alertness or their ability to focus and remember. Whereas nourishment isn't so much directed that way. Again, it's just kind of an overall way of making sure that your body's running smoothly, whereas optimization is a much more targeted kind of need.
Okay, thank you. Are you seeing any interesting trends with regard to food and beverage snack products? And that could be broken down by, again, age, gender.
Generally speaking, we're seeing snacks that offer more nutrient density resonate better with consumers across all age groups. And that's because, and I alluded to this previously, we're snacking so much more often. Now our snacks really have to do more for us. Whether we're intentionally replacing meals with them or not, there's just this expectation that the snack has to deliver something other than just like a great taste. And so those that are more nutrient dense are resonating. And then snacks that offer global flavor discoveries, those too are also very popular with consumers, especially younger consumers like millennials and Gen Z, because as part of being trend forward within our modern food culture, exploring things, having a new food and beverage experience is very important.
Mm-hmm. And that's great because when people try new things and they expand their flavor preferences and they try new flavors, you had mentioned therein lies variety. And, we know that we need a variety of foods and beverages to get all of our nutrient needs met. And I'm just excited to hear that nutrient density, whether people know what that term means or not, but that concept is becoming more of a reason to snack or a focus on choosing what snack you want to have at that particular time of day. Because as I was saying earlier, especially if we're doing more snacking and it's sort of, that mealtime threat, if we can boost the nutrition of the snacks, then we don't need to get as many nutrients, like put all that pressure on the mealtime. We're sort of spreading that out throughout the day.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're seeing consumers orient to new categories of snacks like roasted chickpeas or bean or pulse chips and dips to, still give them that crunchy pleasure that they're used to, but kicking up the nutrition content a little bit. So those are the things that we're starting to see consumers turn to more and more. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's a lot of enhanced waters out there and other beverages and nutrient-dense beverages like smoothies. These are the things that commonly consumers talk about when they talk about their snack choices.
And it sounds like then in turn, that would drive some innovation and inspiration for food companies to come up with new products to sort of meet all those needs.
Absolutely. We've been counseling our clients in the last several years that, snacking is a space to explore. So even if your current portfolio is largely grounded in meal categories, think about ways of, pushing the envelope and, becoming a little bit more occasion agnostic and letting the consumer choose, whether they're going to consume your product as a meal or as a snack, and thinking about getting into some of those more traditional snack type categories, those portable on the go things, but maybe still staying true to your core areas of expertise.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is an unexpected but great opportunity to talk about Bush's Beans because they sponsored your snacking session at the conference. And when we think of beans, and they're not sponsoring the podcast, I'll just say, but when you think of beans, we think of that certainly as a meal ingredient. And it's very versatile and nutritious, obviously, the protein, the fiber. But one of the snack products that we got to taste during your presentation was bean chips. So they're like tortilla chips made from beans, and they were delicious. And there was also, was it the chickpeas snack that we had as well. And so that's a perfect example of what you're talking about with regard to, okay, maybe beans are seen more as a meal item, not a snack item. What types of innovative products could you bring to the marketplace to kind of fill that need for a consumer to snack on something made from beans?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful example of innovation and tapping into a variety of drivers. So, the format that the beans have been put into a chip format is much more portable. It also allows for more flavor discovery and lending itself to more global food traditions, whereas, Bush's and their bean products have been, pretty grounded in traditional American foods. And so, yeah, it's a great way that they've innovated into new spaces.
And if I didn't say it, they were delicious. If I said it already, I'm saying it again. They were really good. My son, my 10-year-old son, was particularly fond of them. So gotta love that. We're always looking for more nutritious snacks. So because we're snacking a lot more often, it's important for us to understand these motivations and, what we can get out of these snacking opportunities. Tell me about, if you can, any sort of research coming up and what you guys might be looking at with regard to consumers and food and consumer insights.
Oh, that's a great question. We're very excited about our upcoming Q2 study. It's going to be about food and technology because for the last 10 years, consumers have really been orienting themselves around fresh, real, less processed foods. That's been the hallmark of quality. And there's been quite a backlash against, industrialized food production and the like. But recently, we've noticed that there's a lot of consumer interest in foods that, especially plant-based foods, that actually have a fair amount done to them to create the products. And yet consumers are turning to them as healthier alternatives. And so we are going to dedicate that Q2 study to understanding that difference. How are some new products on the marketplace being seen as desirable and fresh, real alternatives when they have actually gone through a fair amount? Because when consumers talk about fresh, real, less processed foods, they talk about foods that are as close to their natural state as possible. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're trying to untangle is, where is it permissible? Like in what categories is it permissible to have more processing and more technology applied to the creation of that food? And where does it not resonate? Where does it seem like too much? Mm-hmm. And so where does it seem like technology is promoting health and sustainability and food quality? And where is it seen as a detriment? So that's what our upcoming study is all about. And so certainly we'll be looking at the plant-based alternatives that are out there, but it'll also go beyond.
Very interesting. I talk a lot about technology and agriculture on the podcast. And, as you're talking, what comes to mind is something like an almond milk. Well, it's not really milk, but, it's pretty far from the natural state of an almond. And definitely, I don't have any data to support it, but it just seems like, that's a product that consumers really like and see as healthy and nutritious. So I'll be very interested and stay tuned to see what your results show, because I do think that that's something that we need to figure out so that we can have a bit better reception to the use of technology in food production. And my guess is that part of that sort of subjective perception is, are they seeing the benefits to them directly? Is there a benefit to me that I can see? And then I'm more open to the technology.
Yes, absolutely. We have, in early discussions with consumers over the years that were kind of led us in the direction of wanting to dedicate an entire study to it, consumers had often said, well, technology and processing, if it ultimately makes the product better for me in terms of my health and wellness, or perhaps, better for others like communities, workers, the planet, and the environment, then it's okay. But if it's in the service of the company and improving their bottom line, then it's not okay. So that was kind of like some initial conversations that we were having with consumers. So again, we're very interested in this upcoming study in really digging underneath that and seeing, if that's still their view on it, and what else might be underneath their interest or their lack thereof in technology and food.
Oh, yeah, that sounds really interesting. And to your point, have those thoughts and feelings changed? Why? What's underneath that? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but can you think back to any past research? I was surprised to learn that a lot of people, just the kind of save the planet, good for the environment, feeding other people, feeding the world isn't really close enough to home for a lot of people to kind of have that it is providing them a direct benefit. So can you speak to that at all?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, as I said before, one of Hartman's core areas of expertise is sustainability. And so for decades, we've been understanding consumers' involvement with sustainability. And it really does exist on a continuum. But where people typically start in the world of sustainability and purchasing with that in mind has to do with their own personal benefit. So if a more sustainable version of a product is out there, consumers will be interested first only if it meets their own personal needs. And that might be a health and wellness need. It might be that it benefits them in terms of it being more efficacious, longer lasting, or being less expensive. So personal benefits really is the first access point. Then consumers, once all of those criteria have been met, then they're willing to say, okay, well, now I'm interested in a product if it will support animal welfare and environmental sustainability. So your hunch is bang on. Typically, a product would have to satisfy one's personal interest first, and then they start to consider other higher order needs. And for many years, we were seeing that it was really more about the social aspects of sustainability before the environmental. But in recent years, we've seen consumers actually talk more about environmental pieces as opposed to the social. So we'll be updating our sustainability intellectual capital very shortly. And so it'll be interesting to see how those things have also evolved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting. And one other sort of related question, I did a transparency webinar a few months ago for the Nutrition Entrepreneurs Dietetic Practice Group of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And I co-presented with, it was sponsored by PepsiCo North American Nutrition. And just as a reminder for listeners, they have other products than soda. I don't know what they all are, but they do. And the PhD nutritionist from Pepsi talked about product and company insights. I talked about consumer insights. What I took away from all of the consumer insights and data that I looked at is that people just want information. I saw a recent survey, I think it was by the International Food Information Council. They said X number of consumers, it was a large number of consumers, all agreed that it would be great to have like this sticker on a package that says that it's healthy. And being a former supermarket dietitian, I'm like, oh my God, we've tried to do this. There's so many, every person has a different definition of what healthy is because they're looking for different things. Someone might be looking for gluten-free. Somebody might be looking for more fiber. It's so individual and personalized, and kind of what I see you talking about with regard to snacking and the eating alone versus the communal eating is, we get to kind of pick, okay, what are my individual personalized needs with the snack? But my question to you would be, is that what you've seen as well? Is that, people are hungry for nutrition and we're getting better, I think, as a food and nutrition industry to providing that to them, but that is continuing to evolve. But what would your take be?
Yeah, absolutely. Consumers are interested in transparency. They want information about their food and beverage, certainly from the nutrition facts panel and the ingredient list, but also from narratives on pack that tell them what's in the product, how it was made, and who made it. Those are kind of three big buckets that consumers are interested in, because the stories add more credibility to the ingredient panel and the nutrition facts, because more and more consumers are determining food quality, not just by those like objective measures, but really more subjectively by thinking about how are the ingredients sourced and how was this product produced, and by whom, and what were their motivations. So that's why transparency is so critically important. And you're right, different consumers will take away different messages from the information that's presented to them. For some, they'll read a product description and look at the ingredient list and the nutrition facts panel, and they'll take away, yeah, that's great for my health and wellness objective. Another consumer will read the very same package and think, oh yeah, that's something new and interesting, and I've been wanting to try Ethiopian cuisine, and that hits the mark. So is much, I think it's in food and beverage companies' interests to share information, but then let the consumer decide what it means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that seems to be a huge shift, at least from my perspective as a dietitian. Maybe it's not just me. Either I'm seeing it or, I'm coming at it from a different perspective, or that has been a consumer shift is, yes, they might look to a healthcare professional for, like I said, if they have diabetes or high blood pressure, they might look to a healthcare professional for guidance on that. But at the end of the day, they're going to decide what's healthy for them. But maybe it's been that way all along, or we're just identifying it and putting words to it.
Yeah, no, that it is a newer shift. Consumers are taking a much more intuitive approach, and they're doing a lot of self-experimentation, rather than just relying on the research and the advice of experts out there. They are taking that information into consideration, but then they're ultimately testing it on themselves and saying, well, what makes me feel good? What's working for me? And so that has been a shift in the last decade.
Yeah, and I think that's really good news, because one of the things that we try to promote as dietitians in my field is we know that there's not one size fits all. And we know that, just like we have food preferences and kind of coming full circle with different, our food culture or our cultural background, our cultural heritage, that there's so many differences. And I recently did an interview in an episode where I had my weight management DNA taken and went through my report and everything. And it just underscores that based on our human genome and the differences there, a healthy diet for one person will look very differently for somebody else sometimes.
Indeed. And, this trend toward personalized nutrition is something that we'll be tracking.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, in wrapping up, is there anything else about snacking, meal times, dinner time, that you can leave us with this inspirational send-off? Make us feel better.
Make you feel better. Well, I think the big takeaway is for people who are struggling with snacking and struggling with getting that family meal on the table, know that you're not alone, and know that it's not unique to you, but it's actually part of our culture. We have evolved in this direction because, well, for one thing, the meal times are no longer the building blocks of our day. Now we're eating, just fitting in that eating around everything else. Whereas before we kind of structured our day around when we were supposed to eat. Mm-hmm. So be kind to yourself, find the time when you can eat together. And if that is a weekend morning or a weekday morning, or even if it's just a special snack time on a Friday night, that's okay. And just know that you're not alone. And as long as you're carving out some kind of time that lets you feel like you're getting that time for connection and commensality, that's great.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes. And I think it's great that we don't have to feel as pressured about that recent past dinner time, because it wasn't exactly real. So we can take that extra pressure off of us. And, I think as always, it's just great to share a meal, a snack, whatever the eating occasion is, we eat alone a lot. That's, I do that at my desk at work, it's very common, but when you do have the opportunity to share a meal or snack with somebody, is just, really trying to be present and enjoy it.
Indeed. Makes it better.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Shelley, for being on the show and sharing these fun insights with us and helping us feel better about our snacking and our meal times. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're most welcome. It was my pleasure.
Okay, and we'll stay tuned for that, looking for that new research. I got to keep me posted.
Indeed. I'll come back if you'd have me.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you so much. And for everyone listening, as always, enjoy your food with health in mind. And maybe enjoy your food with some snacking in mind. Till next time. Hey, everybody. As promised, here are some announcements from my partner, the American Association of Diabetes Educators. The Expanding Access to DSMT, or Diabetes Self-Management Training Act, was introduced to the Senate and the House. This bill will remove several barriers to access DSMES, or Diabetes Self-Management Education and Support Services. You can get more information and a letter that you can send to your representative to encourage them to support this bill. You can get that at diabeteseducator.org/expand access. It's really quick and easy. I did it the other day. You click on the link. There's a form to fill out with the letter template and a place for you to add your personal message to the letter. There's also information on how to tweet your representative if you'd like to do that instead or in addition. Also, the study, State of the Science, a Scoping Review and Gap Analysis of Diabetes Online Communities, was recently published in the Journal of Diabetes Science and Technology. Overall, the data showed that diabetes online communities, or DOCs, have a lot to offer a person with diabetes. More information and the key findings can be found at diabeteseducator.org/peer support, but I'd like to share a few of the key findings with you now. First of all, DOC use was associated with neutral or lower A1Cs. Psychosocial health is positively associated with DOC use by way of shared experience, social support, and empowerment. DOC users are reporting behavior change related to peer support by increasing self-care activities, feeling motivated and accountable. DOC users want healthcare providers, such as diabetes educators, to be aware of DOCs and to enhance their understanding of diabetes and the value of the community. Healthcare professionals are not always supportive of DOC use, though when they are, people with diabetes are more likely to use DOCs. Overall, the DOC is helpful most of the time with very little harm reported. One question that comes up from time to time and crossed my mind as I started getting more informed about peer support communities is, with all this information online, the online communities, what about all the misinformation that people might be getting about diabetes and health online? And this study addressed that issue, and they found that misinformation in the DOCs is uncommon, occurring 0 to 9% of the time. So I thought that was really good news. And one more final announcement. The American Association of Diabetes Educators published a study that enforces the efficacy of DSMES, the Diabetes Self-Management Education and Support. A key takeaway is that results from the study showed that person-centered, team-based care for all participants produced a 12-month A1C reduction of 1.7 and 1.4 for intervention and control groups, respectively. So I hope you've enjoyed these announcements from my partner, AADE, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. And as always, reach out to me at melissa@soundbitesrd.com or give me a shout out on social media if you have any feedback or suggestions for the show. Take care.
For more information, visit soundbitesrd.com. Music by Dave Burke.